This is Bella Engelbeck, and I'd like to welcome you to the Ridley Democrats poll watching orientation. This training is for everyone who is going to serve as a poll watcher at any of our Ridley precincts. In this training, we're going to cover what a poll watcher is, what are the things that should be happening on election day, who are the people involved on election day, and your role as a poll watcher on election day. What is a poll watcher? Poll watchers are the eyes and ears and the voice of the candidates and the Democratic Party at each polling place. And poll watchers help us to ensure that voting is taking place according to election laws. When you become a poll watcher, you will receive a poll watcher certificate. This will be in the supplies that are provided for each precinct. If you are not a poll watcher from the Ridley Township Committee, you will receive your poll watcher certificate from your committee. The poll watcher certificate has a raised embossed seal, and it will list the specific precincts. You do not have to stay in that precinct that's listed on the certificate. You can go to any precinct where the candidate whose name is on the certificate is on the ballot. When you go into a polling place, introduce yourself to the judge of elections and show them your certificate, but don't let them keep it. That's for you to keep. What should happen on election day if everything's going well? Let's talk first about the voter experience. Voters should have access to the polling place without any harassment or any intimidation. Their registration information should be correct on the voter rolls. In Pennsylvania, they should not be asked for ID unless they are a first-time voter in that precinct, or their signature when they sign in is really different from the signature on the voter list. Voters should receive the correct ballot. In a primary, if they're a Democrat, they should receive the Democratic ballot. If they are a Republican, they should receive the Republican ballot. In a general election, everybody gets the same ballot. If they can't, for some reason, receive a regular ballot, they should always be permitted to vote on a provisional ballot. They should be able to complete their ballot in privacy and free of any interference. Before they leave, the ballot should be scanned. And if for some reason it can't be scanned, if the machine's not working, for example, the ballot should be kept in a secure location in a locked box until it can be scanned. On election day, the polls should open promptly at 7 a.m. and the election workers should have set up the polling place and all the equipment according to the written instructions that they received from the Delaware County Board of Elections. During the day, election board members should be working as a team without regard to any party affiliation. There shouldn't be a lot of people in the polling place. Only the people permitted by election law should be inside. And so that's the election workers, the voters, occasionally constables, and poll watchers like yourself. When voters sign in, the names of the voters signing in should be repeated out loud. This is something that workers are required to do for any poll watchers who are doing strike lists. Voters whose name does not appear on the list should be assisted to vote. For example, they should be sent to the correct polling place, or they should be given a provisional ballot. There should be stations where ballots can be completed with privacy. All the materials should be kept in an orderly fashion, and blank ballots and spoiled ballots should be accounted for. There should be sufficient ballots for the voters. No one should be waiting for a ballot. And inside the polling place, there should be absolutely no partisan materials or any signs indicating or advocating for any candidates. No voter should ever be turned away. Anyone who believes they're eligible to vote and who wants to vote shouldn't leave the polling place without voting. They are always allowed to vote by provisional ballot. The only exception would be if the judge of elections or somebody else can help them identify where they should be voting and they get sent to that polling place. Sometimes if a voter is not on the list of registered voters, they should be given a provisional ballot. If the voter has already received a vote by mail ballot and they don't have it with them to turn in and surrender, they should be given a provisional ballot. If a voter turns up with their vote by mail ballot, complete with the accompanying envelopes, they should be allowed to turn that in, sign an affidavit, and then be able to vote on a regular ballot. In Pennsylvania, the only people who should be being asked for ID when they go to vote are first-time voters at that specific polling place. Now, this rule applies no matter how long the person has been a voter. They might have been voting for 40 years in another polling place in Pennsylvania. If they have moved and registered in a new polling place, they do need to show ID the first time they turn up to vote. If they haven't voted for 2 years, they don't need to show ID. If they have voted that polling place before. So what kind of ID can they show? They can show photo ID, which would include a driver's license, a Pennsylvania driver's license, or their Penn.ID card. They could have some other Pennsylvania or US government ID. They could have a passport. They could have their armed forces ID, a student ID, or even an employee ID. But they don't even need a photo ID. They could bring their voter registration card. They could bring another non-photo ID that's been issued by Pennsylvania or the U.S. government. That could be a firearm permit. It could be even be their utility bill, a bank statement, or a paycheck. Now, poll workers may request ID if the signature that a person signs in with is really different from the signature in the poll book. Some voters need assistance. Anyone who perhaps can't hold a pen or perhaps can't read the ballot will need some kind of assistance in order to vote. So they can request assistance from the Election Bureau. There is a form that needs to be filled out, and then they will be allowed to have someone help them complete their ballot. There is also a system called the Touch Writer system, which helps people who can't perhaps hold a pen or make a mark on a piece of paper to be able to vote using a touch system. This system also has headphones for people who are visually impaired. In any event, if somebody is being assisted, they should not be assisted by their boss. They should not be assisted by anyone from their union, and they should not be assisted by the judge of elections. But other people like committee people or other elected officials or their friend or their family member may assist, as long as they themselves are not running for election. When a person receives assistance, that should be noted in the polling book. And the name of the person assisting should also be noted in the book. On election day, the polls should stay open till 8 p.m. It's important to note that anyone who is in line to vote at 8 p.m. must be allowed to vote. So the doors should not close until the people who are in line at 8 p.m. have gone inside and actually voted. As the polls are being closed, once again, only the people permitted by election law should be inside the polling place. And when closing the polls, the election workers should be following the written directions from the County Bureau of Elections, and they should continue to work as a team without regard to party affiliation. As the machines are closed down, the machine tallies are printed, examined, signed, and the poll watchers, including you, should get a tally. The total number of voters recorded by the election clerk in the book should match the sum of totals from the machine vote. So that's something to take a look at. Once the tallies have been printed out, examined, and signed, one copy of the tally should be posted on the door of the polling place. And after everything is finished and packed up, the judge of elections will return the equipment, all the materials, including the ballots and the V drives, the electronic drives from the scanners, to the County Election Bureau the same day as the election. So I've already talked about a number of people involved in the election. So let's take a quick look at who these people are. The election board or election workers for a precinct consists of these roles. The first is the judge of elections. This is the person who's in charge of all the election day activities. They're really the manager of the whole day. And they are responsible for opening and closing the polls. And they're responsible for making sure all the paperwork happens, as well as picking up and returning all of those supplies to the county election bureau. They're assisted by a majority inspector. And the majority inspector is going to share that responsibility for operating the polling place. And along with the minority inspector, the majority inspector will manage the poll books and assist voters sign in and make sure that voters get their ballots. The minority inspector has the same responsibilities as the majority inspector. They're also supposed to appoint a clerk to help with the managing of the books, and they sign the provisional ballot envelope. The minority inspector will also receive an envelope on election night. This contains a copy of the results and the numbered list of voters, and they have to hold on to this in the sealed envelope for 2 years in case there's anything that needs to be explored or audited later on. The clerk is appointed by the minority inspector, and they help with the operation of the polling place. And they're going to help with checking in the voters, tracking the voters in the numbered list of the voters book, and they'll help with handing out ballots. And the machine inspector or machine operator will help manage the scanners and the touch writer equipment and make sure that voters are able to use them effectively. And also want to make sure that people are able to vote with privacy. Another person that you may see inside the polls is a constable. A constable is a uniformed officer. They can only enter the polling place at the request of the judge of elections, though they may briefly visit a poll. And they're supposed to be providing safety and security on election day. One thing to keep an eye on is at Ridley Township, the constables are also people who are involved in municipal government, and they're pretty good friends with the Republican greeters and election workers. So they do tend to drive from one polling place to another and hang out and talk to their friends. In an emergency, the Joe is instructed to call the constables first before they call the police. Unless a bodily harm is threatened, there is repeated disruption. And this is because police, whether they're in uniform or not, they're limited to being in a polling place, except when they are voting, responding to emergency, keeping the peace, serving a warrant, or anything that has to do with their official duties. So they really should not be in there unless there really is an extreme emergency or they are voting. So if there's a problem, the Joe will contact a constable first, and the Joe will call the police when there is a true emergency that threatens bodily harm, or if there's someone who is really disrupting the polling place and they can't settle it with the judge of elections and the constable. If the Joe does have to call the police, they'll call the Bureau of Elections immediately afterwards so the Bureau of Elections knows what's going on. I want to stress that this doesn't mean that you can't call 911 in the event of a true emergency, a medical incident, or violence. This is really an option that you have if something happens. Finally, poll watchers like yourself. All political parties have poll watchers. You will see poll watchers from other parties or from other Democratic, you may see other Democratic poll watchers. All the poll watchers must follow the same rules. Some poll watchers may believe that there are a lot of fraudulent voters, and that's the reason they're going to be in the polling places to see if they can catch and challenge those fraudulent voters. Those poll watchers, just like you, are not permitted to speak to or challenge voters. All challenges must be presented to the Joe. You may see candidates. Candidates only can enter a polling place when they are going to vote. Like everybody else, they need to remove or cover any partisan clothing or buttons or pins before they enter the polling place. They are perfectly free to greet voters outside the polling place, and this happens quite frequently, especially with local elections. So let's talk about your role as a poll watcher. What is a poll watcher actually watching for? You're going to be watching for, are the voting processes being followed according to law? Is everything happening, the things that are supposed to be happening? Are all the materials being handled appropriately and according to the law? Are you seeing any partisan behavior inside the polls? And actually that extends to outside the polls, right outside the door if there's any kind of activity that would intimidate voters from coming inside. Are there any voter suppression or intimidation activities going on? And are other poll watchers following election law? As a poll watcher, you can ask questions to the poll workers. So you can ask them how many people have voted. You can ask them, do they have enough ballots? You can ask them how things are going. You just don't want to be disturbing them when they're really busy. You're allowed to sit or stand anywhere where you can see what is happening in the room, as long as you're not impeding the poll workers or the voters. You can examine the voter poll books if no voters are waiting in line. You and the other poll watchers can make a good faith challenge to the eligibility of a voter directly to the judge of elections. For example, if you believe that the voter has moved out of the precinct and is no longer eligible to vote in that precinct, you could challenge a voter, but not to the voter's face, only to the judge of elections. Well, here's what you can't do. You can't ask questions of the voters or confront voters. You can't sit at the poll watchers table, the poll workers table, excuse me, or look over a voter's shoulder while they are voting. You can't fill in for a poll worker who takes a break. You can't challenge a voter's eligibility based on anything like their race, their ethnicity, or their party affiliation. And remember, neither can the other poll watchers do this. There are limits on the number of poll watchers from each candidate and party who may be present in the polling place at one time. The Joe may enforce these limits. What to do if you see an issue? First of all, if you see an issue, talk politely with the Joe. If the Joe can or won't address the issue, call election protection. I'll talk more about that in a minute. Fill out incident report. Don't get angry with the Joe. Don't speak to voters inside the polling place, and do not have a disruptive conversation with other poll watchers in the polling place. You don't want to be disturbing anything. If you're not sure it's an issue, you can contact the Ridley SWAT team on Group Me. Here's how you can get thrown out. The Joe will direct a watcher to leave the polling place if any of the following occur. First of all, the watcher becomes abusive or needlessly argumentative. So keep your tone cool. The watcher repeatedly challenges voters' rights to receive a ballot without cause or based on party affiliation, race, or ethnicity. Or if the watcher is actually campaigning or distributing literature in the polling place. No politicking in the polling place. You shouldn't be wearing any clothing or other item that promotes a candidate or party or displays an election slogan. So remember, if you're also doing some greeting on election day, check yourself for anything you might have, like a t-shirt, a hat, buttons, before you go inside to poll watch. It's really helpful to stay connected. And throughout the day, really committee members and poll watchers can communicate via the GroupMe messaging app. And this will be set up right before the election. And this will be your fastest way to get help, to ask for advice, update others on what is happening at your polling place. So we strongly recommend that when you're asked to join the GroupMe group, you go ahead and do that. Here's some things to watch out for. Sometimes a party will set up a check-in table outside the actual polling place. And so these aren't the election board tables where the voters come in and sign in and get their ballot. These are tables outside where people actually have a strike list, and they are telling people that whether they're in the right place, or perhaps that they're not in the right place, or they're not voting, they shouldn't be voting in this particular place. So keep an eye out for that. The most important thing to keep an eye out for outside is this gauntlet, or the tight line of greeters, 4 or 5, 6 greeters in front of the polling place, or somebody standing in a doorway at a polling place. These things are not good. They're voter intimidation. We don't want anyone to feel intimidated or harassed walking inside. Just keep an eye out for any other behavior that's going on that might be perceived as being harassing or threatening to voters. You also want to keep an eye on what's happening inside. How many people are inside? There are lots and lots of people inside, people who perhaps shouldn't be there. Again, there's a limited number of people who should be there: poll watchers, poll workers, voters, occasionally a constable. Nobody else should be in there. Remember, all those members of the election board, the judges of election, the inspectors and clerks, machine operators, they're all neutral agents. They may not engage in any overtly partisan behavior inside or outside the polls during the hour of the election. So they shouldn't be coming out and doing some greeting and then going back in and working at a table. That's just not right. And so one of the things we see in Ridley Township is that many of the judges of election, majority inspectors, and people who assist them are also involved in or related to people who are in the Republican-dominated municipal government and school board. And honestly, being with their friends, they can just forget the rules of neutrality in their conversations. So keep an eye open for that, and an ear. I talked before about election protection. So election protection, also known as the boiler room, is a team of lawyers who are on call to answer questions, if necessary, speak with Joes, or take other actions when issues arise. If you have a question or a concern not answered by a Joe, call election protection to report the issue and get clarification and support about what you should do next. And it's really essential that you promptly report any suspicious activities, concerns, or problems to the telephone numbers that you'll be getting. When you go to call election protection, step outside. Once you're outside, you can also speak with and get information from affected voters. So if a voter, say, has been turned away, told they can't vote, you can't really talk them inside, but outside you can get information from them. Where do they live, what their name is, information that will help them get further help. Be ready to provide as much information as you can to election protection. It's a good idea, if you can, to start to fill out your incident report before you call them. The election protection line is sometimes busy on a busy election day. Don't leave a voicemail message. Keep trying the numbers until somebody answers. You probably wouldn't do this anyway, but don't go to any court for any relief or an injunction in the event of any type of an issue, but go through election protection. The lawyers will be much better at doing that than we will. Here's just an example of an incident report. There will be incident reports in the materials that you'll receive at each polling place that you can use if you need to call election protection, or even if you want to jot down some other incidents. And here's some additional contact information for you: the Delco Voter Registration Office, the Pennsylvania Voter Registration website. Really good idea. Just have this saved in the browser on your phone so you can help people find their polling place if they need that help. You'll be getting the numbers for election protection in the materials provided on election day. And the number for the Delco Dems headquarters is 610-566-6427. And of course, if you sign up and join the GroupMe app, you'll be all set and connected with members of the Ridley Committee. The whole Ridley Committee really would like to thank you for your service as a poll watcher on election day. Free and fair elections can only happen with dedicated volunteers, and we are so profoundly grateful for your service.